listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.
All right, here we go. And in 3, 2, 1. Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name's Johnny Chandler. I'm the host of Community Forum and the owner of KCCC 930 AM. With me today for a return visit is Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, based in Albuquerque, but an organization that's on behalf of everyone that lives in New Mexico. How you doing, Paul?
Doing well. Good to be back with you, Johnny.
So I guess I'll start with the big news. I know you're always in tune with what's happening in the state of New Mexico, but the big news for us Eddy County and Lee County residents was the idea that the company Holtec no longer wants to deal with the lawmakers of Santa Fe to have that temporary nuclear waste facility here.
Yeah, and this one is incredibly frustrating for us folks who want to see New Mexico's economy diversified and jobs to come to our state. Of course, this proposed facility would have helped diversify, especially southeast New Mexico, Lee and Eddy counties. Not that oil and gas is going anywhere. That is certainly not our assumption, but it would have also helped store spent nuclear fuel from nuclear facilities across the country, at least on an interim basis. And bills were passed in the legislature to prevent this from happening. The governor opposed it. The Supreme Court of the United States weighed in and said, no, the states don't have the ability to reject these kinds of things. Ultimately, though, Holtec, the company in charge, basically said, we don't want to be where we're not welcome. And so they decided they're not going to bring the facility to New Mexico, to southeast New Mexico at all. And I don't know if they have another plan in mind, but that is where things stand at this point. So, this is a classic example of jobs, investment, diversification in our economy at no cost to the taxpayers, unlike so much of what we do that passes for economic development, where you're paying, or at the very least foregoing, large numbers of taxes in order to get a facility built. This one would have been done with no economic development incentives, obviously, in part because the governor and the legislature, at least large swaths of them, the controlling interest in New Mexico's legislature, were not willing to support this facility. Now, happy to take a question, but I did want to share with you a little bit of I thought a very odd coda to this whole situation, which is within a week of this whole resolution, if you will, with the Holtec facility, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham announced the creation of a office park, manufacturing research facility outside of Albuquerque that is going to receive large numbers of subsidies and whatnot from the state, really touting from the hilltops this particular nuclear facility. And it's called Pacific Fusion. They are planning to set up a research and potentially manufacturing facility relating to fusion technology in the nuclear field here in New Mexico at a very significant cost to taxpayers. Now, I'm not a nuclear guru, no expert on the field, but I can tell you that all of the nuclear plants and virtually all the nuclear related activity that we've seen, whether it's for peace and electricity generation or war, has been fission oriented. That means splitting atoms. Fusion happens on the sun, and so we benefit greatly from that, but we've never successfully, as in humans, have never successfully harnessed fusion for electricity generation or any useful purposes. It's been fleeting in the sense that it's thousands of seconds, microseconds of fusion activity on planet Earth. So fascinating, the double standard there, which I commented on, as I do on so much at heirsofenchantment.com.
Right. One of the interesting things that is it's very interesting, the parallels of the two, right? Or the idea of one not being okay, but the other for somehow is worth it and worth taxpayer funds, and the other one's not, and no taxpayer fund is wanted. One of the things I took issue with, I don't remember the name of the lawmaker or the person that said this in the Albuquerque Journal article when it came out, so we can leave it pretty broad. But somebody said that the community did not want Holtec, right? And I don't know what community they were talking about, because I live in the community that wanted Holtec. We absolutely wanted Holtec down here. Maybe the rest of the state didn't, but our community did.
Right. And that's the thing, is that unfortunately, Southeast New Mexico is left in many ways without political representation in the state of New Mexico, even on things like an economic development project like this one that the community was very on board with. I know one of the big opponents was Jeff Steinborn, a very progressive Democrat from Doña Ana County, Las Cruces, which is obviously several hours away from where you and the facility would have lain, and the governor as well. It's just unfortunate. We're all tied to these failed policies that the legislature, the governor, have enacted here in New Mexico. And I know folks in Southeast New Mexico and the more conservative parts of our state desperately want to see change happen and improvements made. Obviously, we're in the midst of municipal elections as we speak right now in a lot of parts of our state, but we're not going to get another bite at the apple in terms of statewide office until November of 2026. And we'll have statewide offices, including governor, but also the New Mexico House of Representatives. And, as much as we've disagreed with Michelle Lujan Grisham on so many things that she's done as governor, I say that the legislature is the true problem holding us back. And even this governor's kind of come to see sanity on a few issues of importance, but she's about to ride into the sunset, so to speak.
Right. All right. Well, let's stay on the energy front then. Governor Lujan Grisham, and I think you said this well right before we recorded, MLG on LNG to Japan, right?
MLG on LNG. Yeah. And this is a fascinating issue that, again, it's all about really developing New Mexico's economy. In this case, it's about bringing more energy in the form of liquefied natural gas from Southeast New Mexico, from Northwest New Mexico, to global markets, and specifically Japan. You could argue that China also a part of that, but of course, the Trump administration kind of pushing back a fair amount against China. Japan's been obviously an ally since the end of World War II. And so the governor of New Mexico, the governor of Wyoming, went over on a trip to Japan and talked to their leadership. And it's really odd. First and foremost, our governor, since she got elected, has really been fairly hostile to the energy industry. She hasn't come after them with what I would call hammer and tongs. She hasn't tried to eliminate oil and gas and completely stop them from doing business in New Mexico, but she's never been friendly. She's always tried to minimize their impact on the state of New Mexico, except for, of course, the money that she has spent and loves to spend. Now she goes over to Japan. She suddenly hits close to her end of term in office, and she's changing her tune, being much more favorable about shipping New Mexico LNG over to Japan. We just call it natural gas, but you have to liquefy it in order to ship it around the globe. And the upshot is, honestly, nothing. There's no specific changes that are being made here. The governor is not expediting permits for pipelines. There's no plan for pipelines. It's all kind of theoretical and, of course, on her way out the door. And so I don't know what will happen, but it is interesting first to note the change in attitude towards energy. It's interesting to note that we at the Rio Grande Foundation have been talking about this issue for over a decade, and suddenly the governor comes to the table, at least theoretically, on the issue of LNG. And it's also worth noting that California, Oregon, Washington State, they are the obstacles to exporting clean American energy across the globe, because if you think Gavin Newsom and the left-wing politicians on the West Coast are interested in pro-American energy policies, even though in many cases we're talking about eliminating old and dirty forms of energy generation with much cleaner and more efficient natural gas facilities, especially in China, not as much in Japan, but this is obviously a resource that we can put to some great use for the benefit of our allies, and even some countries maybe that aren't so allied, like China down the road, that we can help integrate a little bit into the world economy. But I guess better late than never with regard to the governor, and we'll see if she puts any political muscle behind this in her last 30-day session and her, essentially last year or so in office. She's got a year and 2 months before she does head out. And I think we can all imagine that if Deb Haaland becomes the next governor of New Mexico, this is all irrelevant. Nothing relating to pro-energy policies is going to happen in the future under a Haaland administration. Bregman and Miyagishima, two other Democrats in the primary there, are a little more perhaps willing to continue this effort. And Republican, currently still just Greg Hall, mayor of Rio Rancho, I think would be very disposed to expanding this. But that might involve negotiating something with somehow getting Trump to sit down with Scheinbaum down in Mexico, and that's not exactly an easy path either, because Trump has not exactly been a friendly voice to our neighboring nations of Canada and Mexico, and so they're going to definitely want a pound of flesh of some kind out of him. So a lot of moving parts and challenges there. It's a lot easier to get LNG out of the Gulf of Mexico. Still requires some pipes, but you're talking about a vastly longer trip, right, presumably through the Panama Canal, et cetera, et cetera. So just a real challenge to do that. So it's interesting, but I don't think impactful at this point.
So, but in your opinion, a surprising move on your part, on MLG's part, then the idea of
very surprising.
Yeah,
move.
right. So
Absolutely.
You're seeing some positivity if this can be,
Yeah.
if this can follow through, regardless of who the next governor is. You're seeing some positivity on the energy front for New Mexico.
Yeah, and it highlights just another issue with my frustration with Michelle Lujan Grisham, and that she knows this issue. When she was in Congress and Obama was the president, she was in the House. She was one of a relatively small number of Democrats who voted to allow U.S. energy exports directly. This was a standalone bill that ultimately was folded into a broader bill that Obama then eventually signed. He wasn't going to sign just a pro-energy bill, but Lujan Grisham voted for it as a standalone bill. It was probably the best single vote she took when she was elected to the U.S. House. So it's an issue that she clearly has people, maybe not herself, but people who are telling her, some energy people in New Mexico are Democrats, and some of them have influence with the governor. And I'm sure she was getting advice from them both in Congress and now. And, we'll just see if this thing has any legs, or if this is just kind of the governor trying to get right with some energy people.
Right. Or have a few positive announcements on the way out, such as universal child care, perhaps,
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned child care, so let's transition to school choice. You mentioned before we were recording there's some news on school choice. Now, I know how you feel. Anybody that's listened to you know that you're a huge proponent of school choice. Definitely something you talk about almost every time we get together. So what's new on New Mexico related to school choice?
Well, it's not related to New Mexico specifically in the sense that nothing happened in the legislature, nothing was pushed by the governor. What we're talking about is that very controversial, big, beautiful bill that passed earlier this year. And it had a lot of different components to it. One of those was a $1,700 tax credit for school choice through the federal government. So not impacting New Mexico's finances one way or the other. And of course, we know that New Mexico is dead last in education. We have very, very serious issues with the education system and the way it's failed generations of our children and gotten worse in recent years, especially with the governor's COVID lockdown policies. But President Trump is a supporter of school choice. He put into that bill, or got put into that bill, that big beautiful bill, a $1,700 tax credit. It has not taken effect yet. In fact, it won't fully take effect until January 1st, 2027. But basically, it would allow individuals like you and I and others who are federal taxpayers to take a credit of $1 for each dollar spent. So it's a full tax credit.
Okay.
That's the best kind if you're wanting a tax credit. So you would take $1,700 off of your federal taxes, and instead you're donating that to a school choice scholarship grant making organization in your state. And they provide scholarships to the kids who want the different schooling, and everybody's happy, right? Well, one of the compromises that had to be made as that bill, if you'll recall, really struggled for quite a while to get through the congressional process. There was a provision in that bill that it had to be opted into by governors of the respective states. So despite the fact that this governor is the product of St. Michael's School in Santa Fe, a Catholic school, not a public school that she graduated high school from, this governor has been beholden to the unions from day one. And her spokesperson, Michael Coleman, has already announced that the intention is not to participate in this federal school choice program. So the state with the very worst education system in all the country is not interested in doing even something as trivial as this to improve it. Because $1,700 by itself might not make a difference to many families, but if you and I and a handful of other people take this tax credit, well, then it could help one or two children get the schooling they need. And unfortunately, the governor is standing in the way of that, or at least says she plans to.
Well, that's I did not know any of that, Paul. Thank you. I was not paying attention to school choice at all. But I also have a 23-year-old who's out of school. So that might explain why I'm not paying too close of attention to that. But thank you for informing everybody else down here. So we're thinking about Carlsbad, New Mexico, which is where we're at. We've got obviously the Carlsbad Municipal School District. It's very large, comparably successful compared to the rest of the state when it comes to grades and graduation rates and reading levels and things of that nature. We do have one private school now, like a preparatory academy, finally, here in Carlsbad. It's one of the first ones, only opened a few years ago. So under that nationwide school choice plan, somebody could then take their tax dollars and give it to a fund that would then help a scholarship and get a student into that private school and get them out of the public school portion. Now, that's obviously more effective in larger communities that have more options. But that's very interesting. That's the preparatory academy we have here, which is very well loved. Actually seems to be doing some really great things. So the community's real excited about that. All right, so let's move on. Right now, we are literally in the middle of a government shutdown. All right, federal government is shut down.
Still shut down, yeah.
I personally am feeling zero effects of it, right? That doesn't mean that other people aren't, or we won't feel it down the line, but I'm not a federal government employee. I work for a college, so I'm a state employee. I own a radio station, so everything seems to be running pretty well without the federal government open at this point, Paul. So I guess we'll just let you take it from there.
Well, you and I are pretty much in the same vein there with regard to our personal situation vis-a-vis the federal government. We are probably in the minority of New Mexicans in a lot of ways in that regard.
That is so true.
New Mexico is and you can find different studies to this effect, but will always be close to the top. According to Wallet Hub, we're the second most dependent on the federal government of any state in the country. Only Hawaii, according to their report, is more dependent. We're dependent in New Mexico in multiple different ways on the federal government relative to other states. We have a lot of federal lands, and that includes oil and gas rich lands like Bureau of Land Management, et cetera. We're also a state that has 2 national parks. There's plenty of states around the country that don't have any national parks, but of course, you're all intimately familiar with Carlsbad Caverns, hopefully.
Yep.
And White Sands is the other national park in New Mexico. So the Trump administration now has tried to keep some of those parks open or at least staffed to the effect of allowing people to still tour them. I don't know what it's like on the ground, but I know that is a challenge with a lot of these parks.
Yeah, we are real quick, Paul. We are, just so everybody knows, everybody locally knows, we'll tell you, we are shut down. Caverns is not open. You can literally go on the website and you can still pay $1 to reserve a time, which is something that never changed after COVID, right? You used to be able to show up. Now you got timed entrance. You can still go on the website, pay $1 to reserve it, and then when you drive up to the front, there's a sign that says it's closed. So it's officially shut down.
Good to know. I don't think that's the case universally, but of course, Carlsbad Caverns is a pretty easy place to shut down because being a cave, there's limited ingress and egress opportunities there. Some of these other parks, you spend more manpower keeping people out of them than you do just letting some folks walk in or hike in or whatever. So that's one way we're dependent. Another way is because of our military and national security installations, of course. And of course, in the national labs, I'm specifically referring to Sandia and Los Alamos, are contracted through the federal government. They're not direct employees. They're not funded in the same budgeting cycle. So, but I do know that the National Nuclear Security Administration has seen furloughs, and as time passes, if this situation is not resolved, there could be further temporary furloughs and whatnot in terms of people not getting paid. And
there's been discussion here. It hasn't happened yet, but the rumor is that the waste isolation pilot plant, DOE funded endeavor, is probably going to cease operations starting in the beginning of November until the shutdown's over. That's what we're hearing.
I'm sure they'll have, hopefully, a skeleton crew enough. You don't want to leave nuclear waste unattended, but that's another critical aspect of all this. You want to make sure that some of these sites are really maintained.
I mean, there are 700 employees at the waste isolation pilot plant here in Eddy County, right? 700 employees. If all 700 of them do not receive a paycheck, regardless if they have to work or not, it is going to hurt this small city of Carlsbad economy. 100%.
True, absolutely. And so a lot of that is kind of in flux depending on budgetary stresses and what pots of money have been kept available. The third major way that we're reliant is despite all the oil and gas wealth that we have, despite all the things we talk about, New Mexico statistically remains a very poor state because we are very poorly governed. That means we have 1 out of every 5 New Mexicans on food stamps, which is a very significant level above any other state in the country. And as of November 1st, just a couple days here, that program may be without funding. And so there's a huge debate about that right now, mostly in social media circles and whatnot, and pressure placed on the Trump administration to try to divert some other funds. It is worth noting, of course, that this is a shutdown courtesy of the Democrats in Washington, D.C. In our case, of course, that means specifically the U.S. senators, because the Senate has the additional obstacle called the filibuster that requires 60 votes for this funding legislation to pass. We're talking about a clean CR continuing resolution, basically continuing the Biden level of government spending. So we're not even, putting any money less than Biden was putting in when he left office. And so it's an incredibly fraught situation where the big beautiful bill and other legislation has been passed, and the Democrats are trying to rewrite history. Of course, I mentioned Obama. Ultimately, Obamacare is at the heart of all this, and the Obamacare legislation that expanded healthcare coverage through Medicaid, a welfare program, and these Obamacare exchanges, which were further enhanced in terms of the income levels where people could receive the subsidies through those exchanges up to 85, 90, 95% of the cost of those healthcare policies provided by federal taxpayers and subsidies for them. And that was a temporary thing for COVID during 2021. The Biden administration and Congress at the time passed, and now they want to revisit it and go back and say, oh no, we're going to continue this indefinitely. And needless to say, Republicans have a real problem with that, as they should. And that's why we're at this kind of stalemate here.
It's very interesting.
Now, here in New Mexico, for lack of a better word, lack of a better situation, the legislature had the special session, and they stepped in to use our oil and gas money to prop up these exchanges. So now the state of New Mexico has stepped in and is funding these healthcare exchange programs, providing the subsidies right here in the state. So it's a messy situation, and I think both sides are pretty dug in right now. The progressive base of the Democratic Party does not want Chuck Schumer to compromise. And until that happens, I think we're going to be stuck in this cycle. So I think that's one of the reasons that Republicans are kind of allowing this food SNAP situation to go the way it is, because that is a Democrat constituency group, and they're going to start to get very antsy when their people are losing those welfare benefits.
Well, it's certainly something to watch. There's a lot of lives that are affected by this government shutdown, and as you just stated, our state, like whenever there was a recession, remember the 2007 recession? Just real quick, right? 2007, we had the housing market collapse, we had a big bubble where the recession hit. It took New Mexico about a year or so to really feel that, if maybe not, if a little bit longer, because we were so heavily subsidized by the federal government to keep things afloat, right? The private industry went down first, government held on. Well, a couple of years later, whenever people are starting to recover, we're just barely starting to feel it because the government's got to clamp down a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll just add that my personal level of impact could be vastly increased when I step on a plane here in the next few days, because, of course, the FAA and air traffic control system, those are all federal employees. Now, in my previous life, when I worked for the National Taxpayers Union, I worked on air traffic control modernization and reform. There's a lot of reasons to go into on why that makes sense, but I'll just say that Canada and European countries have separated their air traffic control from direct government control. Canada is run by a nonprofit. It's got a great safety record. It's more efficient, more technologically advanced. The United States has kept a federally controlled and operated air traffic control system. And this is a great example of a reason why we shouldn't have that kind of poor transportation infrastructure tied up with government the same way that it is. So, we could avoid some of this with limiting the role of the federal government Federal government does way too much, spends way too much money, and that's at the heart of the problems that we face as a nation.
Right. Well, Paul, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to be able to give you a couple more minutes. Before we started recording, you mentioned something about produced water. I do want to get to that. I do want to get to that because produced water is so important for us here in this community and our part of the state. So what do you have for us on produced water?
There are efforts underway, and you can go to airsofenchantment.com and see the testimony that we provided to the Environment Department. Basically, there are efforts underway to treat produced water and reuse it and alleviate some of our long-term, short-term drought conditions, provide it for additional business development, et cetera, and also, of course, treaty obligations with the state of Texas. So they tell me, I did a podcast with folks who are behind this effort at Tipping Point, New Mexico, and the folks there say that they can essentially create distilled water, which so lacking the minerals that your normal water out of the tap comes with, so even cleaner in that sense. But there are ways to use that produced water to greatly benefit New Mexico economically and environmentally.
On average, for every barrel of oil that we get out of the ground here in Eddy County, we come with at least 4 barrels of very, very brackish water. Right? Yeah. It's really, really nasty.
To treat that brackish water and make it clean, but they say it can happen. The environmentalists, the radical environmentalists, they don't like oil and gas to begin with. So any new technology that helps make oil and gas more valuable, more successful is something they're going to oppose. It's purely a tit-for-tat political strategy to prevent further development of an industry that they despise. Right. That's my humble opinion.
I'm going to agree with your opinion. It's an ideology. The anti-oil and gas is an ideology. It doesn't come from an economic or common sense standpoint of how people are going to power their phones in their houses. It's an ideology that should not exist in any form. And people are allowed to agree with that. They're allowed to think that way if they'd like. But then again, they're also not allowed to look at their iPhones either if you want to get rid of all of it. It's your call.
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. It's your call, whatever you want to do. Well, Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, riograndefoundation.org, airsofenchantment.com, tippingpointnewmexico.com.
You got it.
Finally, man. I think that's the first time in 4 years. But anyways, I'm glad. Paul Gessing, thank you. We'll have you on again very soon. Thank you, sir.
Take care, Johnny. Bye.
You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.